Hello, I'm going to explain how to interpret golden mean midpoint structures. This is part 2 in a 7-part series on the golden mean. You do not need to watch part 1 to follow on what I'm going to present here, as long as you're familiar with what the golden mean is, also known as the golden ratio, and if you're familiar with midpoint structures, you'll be able to follow this. Now, warning, I'm going to be presenting some really new ideas, things that are way outside the scope of what is normally considered to be important in astrology, even further outside the box than my other videos. And also, I want to mention, I'm going to be presenting ideas not only from personal experience doing charts, but also from research, going through a database to see who has these very strong golden mean midpoint structures. And the advantage of this is that we are not using convenience sampling, in other words, just what charts we happen to see, but we're interpreting the charts that come up in the database as people who have the strongest golden mean midpoint structures. So it makes it a more solid, a more rigorous kind of study to figure out if golden mean midpoint structures might really be important. And I think you're going to be impressed that they really are. Okay. Now, to build upon what I just said about this being new information, what might help you to absorb this is that what we're finding out in this research is that there is an intricate system of planetary patterns. There are intricate vibrational patterns. And the intricacy and sophistication of these patterns is way beyond what I ever imagined. So we're going to be digging deeper into the ways that planetary patterns are created. And it's, like I say, it's more intricate than I had imagined. And we're going to be introducing some new ideas that we have come across through the research. Another thing that might help you to get oriented to what we're doing, to feel comfortable with it, is this quote from Nikola Tesla: "If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration." And that's what we're finding out through this research, that there are these intricate vibrational patterns, and again, way beyond what I had anticipated. By the way, I still haven't found a primary source for this quote of Tesla, but it's repeated often and probably is true. But it conveys the feeling of what we're going to find here is how intricate and sophisticated these planetary patterns are. Now, to quickly review some things from the first video in the series, that a golden mean midpoint structure occurs when one planet is at the golden mean between two other planets. And let's see an example of it. This is the example we showed in the first video, where this fellow Colin Wardrop has Saturn opposition Uranus with a 3-degree orb, and Neptune is at the golden mean point. So that's a golden mean midpoint structure. It's shown here in this tree diagram. Neptune is at the golden mean of Saturn and Uranus. And this glyph here that looks like a wheel means that Neptune is at the first golden mean midpoint, going around the zodiac from Uranus towards Saturn. It's at the first one. We sometimes call it a GM3, GM meaning golden mean, and 3 meaning the 0.382. So it's a GM3 midpoint structure. If there was a planet over here at the next golden mean midpoint, that would be a GM6 midpoint structure. If you're not following that, then maybe you could watch the first video to get more information about it. And here's an example of the GM6, Uranus at Jupiter, Neptune. Here's Uranus between Jupiter and Neptune at the second golden mean midpoint. Here's another GM6 midpoint structure. The moon is at the second of the two golden mean midpoints. The first one would be over here, 0.618 from Neptune, and the second one is here where the moon is, 0.618 from Uranus. So these are the golden mean midpoint structures. And the interpretation is that when you have a golden mean midpoint structure, the planets express themselves in a very natural way, very instinctive, almost like you're breathing or your heart is beating. You take it for granted. It's just very easy for you. And even though it's easy, and we sometimes call the golden mean the like the divine proportion, it has names like that. It's not always so divine. The midpoint structure can get expressed in a positive or a negative way. Okay, so let's go on to our next slide. Now, in order to figure out what something means in astrology, like if we want to know, are these golden mean midpoint structures really important? Is it really important that Neptune is at the golden mean midpoint of Saturn and Uranus, and Moon is at the golden mean midpoint of Uranus and Neptune? Well, what's often done is we just keep looking at charts of friends and family and famous people, and we happen to see some, and then we try to come up with an idea of what it means. The alternative to that is to go through the database and find these things. And I think that your personal experience is very important, and the research is important, because the research removes that selection bias and forces us to deal with the data and see if it really matches the data. Now, in order to do the research, we have to have some software that'll find golden mean midpoint structures. Well, the Sirius 2.0 software has fantastic research features, but it did not have the ability to find golden mean midpoint structures. So I added that feature. I'm one of the programmers of this software, and we added it. So let me show you how that's done. If we go into the research and we select astrosignature research, and then I'll just say, let's do a new search, and we'll call it golden mean midpoints, whatever we want to call it. And we click on Make New Astrosignature. So it takes us in here, and what we do is we click on Midpoint, because that's what we want, of these things, and we can analyze some particular midpoint structure, such as, for example, Saturn at the Uranus-Neptune midpoint. But I want the angle to be a golden mean. When it's a golden mean angle, we don't know what the angle is. It's that 0.618, almost 62% through whatever the angular distance is. So I added a new feature, and to know what the new feature is, we added a button, Help for Golden Mean. You click on the help, and it tells you what to do. You can put GMB to get both near and far golden mean midpoints. GMN just for the near, and GMF just for the far. Here's some more explanation about it, and an explanation about the orb, and also that you have an option for harmonics. So let me just click OK, and I'll show you what this is explaining. It's telling us that we can put GMN here. Since I don't know if far midpoints are important yet, I often just put the GMN for now, and it takes it. This means do the golden mean midpoint structure. So that's the new feature, to put GMN in here, or GMB or GMF. And the orb, what that message was telling us is that this orb is 1%. It's not actually 1 degree. If I click on this help, it's saying the applying orb is the percent of the angular distance. So this is a 1% orb. I explained that in the first video, that you can set your orbs as percentage or as fixed amounts. And our research so far shows that percentage works better. And that's the only option available now in the research, is this will be 1%. And the separating orb, there's a note here that you can check this box to make the separating orb a harmonic. So if I put 7 here, it's going to find this golden mean midpoint structure in the 7th harmonic chart. And this is one of the very surprising things we found, is that golden mean midpoint structures are important, not only in the natal chart, but also in a harmonic chart. And now you start to get the feeling about why I gave you this warning at the beginning. We're going to places people would never imagine. I never imagined it myself, that there's such a thing called a golden mean midpoint structure. Sounds very way out there, very speculative, and then we're going to do it in a harmonic chart? Yes, and I'm going to show you some of the evidence in the next slides on that shows that these golden mean midpoint structures are important, and in some of the later videos that they're important in harmonic charts. So again, this is a whole new world of analysis, whole new ideas of what could be important in the astrology chart. So we can save this, and we have our research. If I click on this Update Now button, it'll update the information. Saturn is in a golden mean aspect to the Uranus-Neptune midpoint, and it's got the one. It's actually not 1 degree; it's 1%. The orb is 1%, and the strength. I often set the strength to a bigger number, like 10, because then, as the aspect gets more exact, you get 10 points, and then 9, 8, 7, all the way down to 1 points as the orb gets bigger and bigger. So it'll pick out the strongest ones. All right, so we could save our changes, and then we would just do the research. I usually go here and select only AA data. Over here you can select any category. I usually select all the famous people and click the begin analysis, and it would give you your results. Okay, so that's what's needed to make progress. I was not able to do this research until I added that feature to be able to find these golden mean midpoint structures. Until we're able to do that, it's just anecdotal evidence. It's not very convincing, and we really don't know. So now we're finally able to do the research to see if this works, and the results are very impressive. So what I did is I actually added 3 midpoint structures. I just showed you one of them, the Saturn at the golden mean of the Uranus-Neptune midpoint, and then we add 2 more, Uranus at the golden mean of the Saturn-Neptune midpoint, and Neptune at the golden mean of the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. Now there's all 3 combinations of Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, with either Saturn, Uranus, or Neptune being the focal planet. So we can make that astrosignature with these 3 midpoint structures, and then we just do the research. And Cohen Wardrop is one of the people who showed up as having these very strong, because we noticed in his chart he has one of those midpoint structures exact. Which one was it? Let's go back to that wheel. It's the Neptune at Saturn Uranus, and the orb is 0.00. So the orb with the golden mean midpoints is done as a percent. It's 0%. It's exact. The moon at Uranus Neptune, 2%. 2% of the 1%, because I'm using a 1% allowable orb, and it's 2% of the 1%. So it's, within whatever that is, like 1,000th of a percent. It's extremely exact, and this one is completely exact. Neptune at Saturn Uranus. So when it's a golden mean midpoint structure, it shows it as a percent. And if it's a regular midpoint structure like Uranus conjunct Sun Moon, well, then we're just using the normal orbs, 1 degree, 9 minutes, and so on. Okay, so we find that Cohen Wardrop, for example, has this very, very strong midpoint structure involving Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, a golden mean midpoint structure. And we're going to find out that people who are murderers have these kinds of midpoint structures. Cohen Wardrop was not a murderer. He died from a drug overdose. So people who are using drugs intensively, extreme drug use, drug addicts, for example, murderers, these kinds of people show up as having these golden mean midpoint structures between Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. So golden mean isn't so divine all the time. What it means is that the person has this different way of seeing the world. They don't distinguish fantasy from actual real behavior that much. Life doesn't have this concrete grip over them, and they live out their thoughts more readily than other people do. They're less inhibited because they feel more like they're in a dream anyway. So they will just do things other people wouldn't do. Somebody might think of murdering somebody, they're not going to do it. But if you have Uranus at Saturn Neptune, or Neptune at Saturn Uranus, or Saturn at Uranus Neptune, you have one of these three midpoint structures, a golden mean midpoint structure, it's easier for you to do these things. And I think that that's what's happening. I don't think Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, golden mean midpoint structures make people evil. It makes them live out their fantasies or their thoughts more easily than other people. Maybe a lot of people might do things like that if they didn't have a greater sense of responsibility not to. Okay. All right, and I explained that here. Enable them to do extraordinarily horrific things. Their behavior is not as real as it is for most people. Okay. Now, let's look at another case of a person with a very strong Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, golden mean midpoint structure. His name is Emil Messner, and this is kind of gruesome, ugly stuff we're going to look into, but this is what showed up, is this fellow strangled a woman to death on June 30, 1987. I was not able to find any other information about him. So all I know is that, essentially, is that he's a criminal and he strangled a woman on this date. And in his chart, we will see the Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune again in the golden mean midpoint structure. Neptune is at the golden mean midpoint of Saturn and Uranus. Let's look at his chart. Very similar to Colin Wardrop. Here's Neptune at Saturn-Uranus midpoint, and he has a nearly exact Moon-Saturn conjunction, only 11 minutes. So Neptune is at the Saturn-Uranus midpoint and the Moon-Uranus midpoint. And here's the midpoint structure that I've copied. And look at these orbs. Neptune is at Moon-Uranus midpoint 3%. That's 3% of the 1%. Given the 1% orb, it's within 0.03 of that 1% orb. And Neptune is at the Saturn-Uranus midpoint 0.05. So again, almost exactly right there. I think it's amazing. Both Colin Wardrop and Emil Messner both have Moon, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune in golden mean midpoint structures. So again, people who engage in these unusual behaviors, either drug use, criminal behaviors, also psychic ability, very unusual imagination, will have these golden mean midpoint structures involving Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, often with a fourth planet, in these two cases, with the Moon. Now, I was curious to see what transits there were on June 30th, 1983, when Emil Messner strangled the woman. I don't have a time and a place, but I used a time of 12 noon in Paris. I think he was born and lived in Paris, so it was probably there. And I show the biwheel, and this is really fascinating. On this day that he strangles a woman. Now remember, here in the inner wheel is his birth chart. I've got so many lines in here. I'll explain all this. I know it looks messy, but we'll be studying what all these lines are in a second. But remember, he's got Neptune at the golden mean between his Moon, Saturn, and his Uranus. Here's the Uranus down here. Now, on the day he strangles this woman, transiting Uranus at 24 Sagittarius 10 is conjunct his Moon-Saturn conjunction, but it has a half a degree orb. So Uranus on his Moon-Saturn conjunction, astrologers would typically say, well, that's very disturbing, but it's not exact on the date that he strangles the woman. It's actually a half a degree orb, so it's probably a week or two away from this date. So why, or even more, so why does it happen on this particular day? Well, one thing I noticed, and this isn't the most important one, the more important one is the second one I'll tell you about, but the first thing is, it's interesting that on this day, here in the sky, the transits, Uranus is at the golden mean midpoint of Saturn and Neptune. So I put little arrows here from Neptune and Saturn to show that in the sky Uranus is at Saturn, Neptune, a golden mean midpoint structure. So maybe there's a kind of resonance that on a day when there's this disturbed or extreme psychic sensitivity resonated with him. Maybe. That's I just noticed that was kind of interesting. But something else I noticed is really even more amazing. Look at this. In his natal chart, he has Mars and Neptune. This is his Mars at almost 25 Taurus, Neptune at 5 Scorpio. They are 160 degrees apart. More specifically, they're 160 degrees and 18 minutes. In the sky on this day, Mars and Neptune are also 160 degrees. Here's transiting Mars at 25 degrees Cancer, almost 26. Here's Neptune at 6 Capricorn. That's 160 degrees. More specifically, 160 degrees, 36 minutes. So the Mars-Neptune angle in the sky is the same as at birth. Now, this is the part that's mind-boggling, really incredible, is that Mars has moved to the golden mean point. So this Mars-Neptune angle that's the same in the sky as at birth is offset from the natal by the golden ratio. So I've got here these purple lines from natal Neptune and natal Mars to the transiting Mars. What I'm trying to show here is that transiting Mars is at the natal Mars-Neptune midpoint. So let's see. We have transit to natal. Mars is at the Mars-Neptune, and it is 0.03. Transiting Mars is exactly at 12 noon. So on that day, at sometime during that day, Mars transited exactly at the golden mean point between Mars and Neptune. And the transiting Mars-Neptune midpoint is at the golden mean of the natal Neptune. So I've got these purple lines from the transiting Mars and Neptune to the natal Neptune. So transiting Mars is at the natal Mars-Neptune midpoint, and the transiting Mars-Neptune midpoint is at the golden mean of the natal Neptune. So what we have here is that the transiting Mars and Neptune and the natal Mars and Neptune are aligned in perfect golden mean midpoint structures. And it's exact on that day. The orbs are near zero at 12 noon. This is incredible. Is it a coincidence? If it's a coincidence, it's a literally 1 in a million kind of coincidence that Mars and Neptune moved into the same angle in a golden mean relationship to the natal Mars-Neptune. And so this taking action, a dreamy kind of action, he basically was, the way we interpret this is that he is living out his fantasy. He's living out his dream. Life doesn't feel as tangible. He's so gripped with his emotion that he's almost as if he's sleepwalking. He's just living out this passion that he has, this Mars-Neptune. He's living it out in real life. And, if somebody takes drugs in addition or is an alcoholic, that further reduces your inhibition. So what's happening here is that the golden mean makes for a natural, easy flow, and you just become absorbed into that way of being. And this is Mars-Neptune taking action on your fantasies, your dreams. He's living out his thoughts and feelings, and they happen to be negative. So the golden mean is not necessarily divine. It just makes you naturally attuned to a certain way of being. So on this particular day, he's extremely Mars-Neptune, and he lives out his fantasy. He does it. Um, so, okay, so I already went over that. So he has the Mars-Neptune extreme golden mean activity on that day. And this day could have been a beautiful day if his fantasies and dreams and hopes were not distorted, were not malicious. He would have done something beautiful on that day. But what happens is whatever passion you have, you become absorbed into, and you just tend to do it. Almost without resistance. And sometimes when people analyze these crimes, they find that the person is not screaming or yelling or out of control. They're just acting like they normally would, but doing crazy things. They're like zombies. They're just like sleepwalking through something, and that's what's happening here. He's just living out his dream in real life. It's a nightmare dream is what he's living out. So the golden mean, I believe, is what's motivating him and what's getting triggered on the day of this murder. Without the golden mean, we would not be able to see any of this going on. So I think the golden mean does add a new level of insight to our astrology. All right, now here's the third case, Eugene McCallum. He has a very similar pattern to Emil Messner, very similar to Emil Messner, also somewhat similar to Colin Wardrop, and he's also a murderer. So this is amazing. Eugene McCallum, Emil Messner have very similar golden mean midpoint structures. They're both murderers. They both have Neptune at the golden mean midpoint of Saturn and Uranus, and they both have it almost exact. They also both have Moon conjunct Saturn, but it's weak for McCallum. Let me show you McCallum's chart. Here it is. He's got Neptune at the Saturn-Uranus midpoint, 0.03. He also has Uranus at Jupiter-Neptune, and it's 0.30, which is, if it's smaller than 0.50, it's strong. This is what we found in looking at all these charts. So he also has a Uranus at Jupiter-Neptune. So he has a string of golden mean midpoint structures. Uranus is at Jupiter-Neptune. I have this very faint, but actually it's not that faint. It's 0.30. I have it in a very thin red line showing that Uranus is at Jupiter-Neptune. Maybe I shouldn't have made it so thin because it's definitely there. Uranus is at Jupiter-Neptune, and then Neptune is at Uranus-Saturn. So it's a string of golden mean midpoint structures. Again, Uranus is at the golden mean midpoint of Jupiter-Neptune, and Neptune is at the golden mean midpoint of Saturn-Uranus. And what this means is you get the disturbed psyche, Saturn-Uranus-Neptune, highly oversensitive psychic sensitivity, and the Jupiter-Uranus-Neptune means it's big, it's huge, it's like enthusiastic. And usually Jupiter-Uranus makes things positive, but we found with golden mean midpoint structures and golden mean aspects, they seem to be ethically neutral. The person just does whatever that energy is. And if they've had trauma in their life, or for some or other reason they've built up a lot of anger or hostility or negativity, it'll come out in negative ways, which is what's happening here. Bottom line is this. We have two murderers and a fellow who dies from a drug overdose, all having the same kinds of golden mean midpoint structures. Very, very interesting. Now, I did the same thing with McCallum that I did with Messner. I have a date for one of his murders. He strangled a woman to death, a prostitute to death, on November 11th, 2000, just north of Boston, Massachusetts. Here's a website address where I read this. So we saw that when Messner strangled a woman, there were two transit to natal golden mean midpoint structures involving Mars and Neptune. when we look at Eugene McCallum, we see something very interesting. And as I warned you at the beginning, we're coming into new territory in this research. We see what we call mixed midpoint structures. And let me show it to you. A mixed midpoint structure, for example, is this. In the outer ring, we have the transits on the day that he murders this lady. Here's transiting Uranus, transiting Neptune, and natal Saturn. And transiting Uranus is conjunct the midpoint of transiting Neptune and natal Saturn. I call this a mixed midpoint structure. So instead of Uranus being at a natal midpoint, or a transiting midpoint being, for example, conjunct a natal planet. So it's not natal midpoint to, let me say this again. It's not transiting planet to natal midpoint or transiting midpoint to natal planet. It's a mix. We have transiting Uranus, and one of the planets forming the midpoint is a transit, and the other one is natal. So it's transiting natal. I have Uranus-T, meaning transit, conjunct the Saturn natal and the Neptune transit. So two of the three planets are transits. One is the focal planet and one is one of the other planets. So we call that a mixed midpoint, where the midpoint is made from a transiting planet and a natal planet. It's transiting Neptune and natal Saturn that makes the midpoint. And it's a conjunction. So conjunctions and oppositions, as well as golden mean midpoint structures, are very important. And there's our Saturn, Uranus, Neptune on the date of the murder. We again have Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and look at the orb, 6 minutes. So what we're seeing very consistently is that Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune lead to a disturbed or highly excited psychic sensitivity. And there's another mixed midpoint structure. Natal Uranus is at the midpoint of transiting Saturn over here and natal Neptune. Okay? So you get a midpoint structure, and it doesn't matter which planets are transit and which are natal. In this case, Uranus and Neptune are natal. Transiting Saturn moves to the point that makes a golden mean midpoint structure. So it's Uranus natal, I've got an N, at the golden mean, GM, of Saturn T, means transiting Saturn, and Neptune natal, and look at the orb, 0.17. That means 17% of the 1%, almost exact. So on this date, there are 2 golden mean midpoint structures involving Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. This is really unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And here's the natal Neptune, Saturn, Uranus. So he has Neptune at the golden mean of Saturn, Uranus in his chart. And then he has 2 Saturn, Uranus, Neptune midpoint structures, both of them mixed midpoint structures, one of them a golden mean, the other a conjunction on the date of the murder. So, as I told you at the beginning of this video, we're heading into a whole new realm of pattern analysis where Nikola Tesla was right. If we want to understand the secrets of the universe, we have to think in terms of vibration and frequency. And wow, these vibrations and frequencies are much more intricate and sophisticated than we ever imagined. But in retrospect, it's not that surprising. Why can't we take this natal Neptune and this Uranus and this transiting Saturn to get a relationship? These are just things that we have assumed in astrology are not important. We've assumed midpoints are not as important as regular aspects. We've built our world around this. We've just developed our thinking in that way. And what this research is showing is that there's a whole new level of information, of things that are going on that have been missed. Very, 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 very fascinating. I know some people watching this will be extremely skeptical because it's so far outside the box, but the evidence is very compelling, especially when you look at how small the orbs are. So not only do we have this idea that there are golden mean midpoint structures, but we also are developing this idea of mixed midpoint structures. And in order to find these things, we're going to have to add more features to the software. So we're working on programming this, and future versions of the software will be able to detect these things. But we don't have software to do things that nobody's ever thought about. So every time we come up with a new discovery, then it puts the pressure on to develop the software so we can discover these things and apply them and use them. So what's happening is we have this synergistic effect of we develop research tools, the research tools make discoveries, and then with those discoveries we end up having to add more software features. So the research, the data, the software features are all necessary parts of advancing astrology to this new level. Okay, so I've already discussed this. The intricacy and sophistication of how these vibrations are formed increases from the new discoveries. So the basic concept of vibrational astrology is really simple, but the ways in which the vibrations are created is very intricate and sophisticated. Now, I made an astro signature. I used the astro signature research feature in Sirius and I weighted it this way, that if there were one of the three Saturn, Uranus, Neptune golden mean midpoint structures, I gave it 40 points. If there are one of the three Moon, Uranus, Neptune golden mean midpoint structures, I gave it 20 points. And if there are one of the three Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune golden mean midpoint structures, I gave it 10 points. So I made an astro signature with 9 items. You know, Saturn at the golden mean of Uranus, Neptune, Uranus at the golden mean of Saturn, Neptune, Neptune at the golden mean of Saturn, Uranus. All 3 possibilities, with any one of these 3 planets being the focal planet. And do that for all 3 of these, you get 9 combinations. I gave more points to the disturbing Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, fewer points to the Moon, Uranus, Neptune, and the fewest to Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, with a maximum allowable orb of 1%. And the software will give the most points when the midpoint structure is exact, and we end up with these results. The results, the top 7 people: Colin Wardrop, number 1, and he has the most points given this formula. So this is a formula for highly sensitive psyche that can make you live in a dream world, or be an intuitive or psychic in some way out of the norm. Colin Wardrop, number 1. Monica Bellucci, an actress, number 2. Emil Messner, murderer, is 3. Eugene McCallum, a murderer, is number 4. Johann Bruynel, a bicyclist and sports director, is the next one. Thierry Elias, a French organist and pianist, is the next one. And Julie Erickson, a computer science teacher and astrologer, is the last one. So these are the people who scored in the top 7, the strongest people. 2 of them are murders, 1 dies from a drug overdose. We have very little information about the organist. The computer science teacher and astrologer is also a psychic, sees auras and all kinds of other things. And Johann Bruynel was involved in doping, where they're taking drugs to enhance their performance, and he was found guilty and he admitted to it. So he's involved in drug use. So every one of these people that we have information about is either highly sensitive, psychic, intuitive, or lives in some kind of dream world, or is Monica Bellucci. She's the only one, this actress, who doesn't fit what we would expect. So all of them are involved with drugs, crime, or have psychic ability except Monica Bellucci. We've already looked at the charts of Wardrop, Messner, and McCallum, and very briefly we'll look at a few of the others. And by the way, if we look at the dates, most of these people were born in 1964. So in 1964, there was a golden mean midpoint structure happening between Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. One of them was born in 1958. But there's the dates: July, late September, mid-September, late August, late June, and mid-September. So it's going in and out of orb, and when inner planets became involved, this would happen. So a highly sensitive psychic kind of energy happening on and off in 1964, also 1958, and we get these very unusual people. Well, here's the information about Broynell, I guess you pronounce his name, given a 10-year ban by the USADA, established conclusively that he was at the apex of a conspiracy to commit widespread doping. What he said about the ban is, I do not dispute that there are certain elements of my career that I wish had been different. So he, in a gentle way, admits that it's true. So I want to also mention that in addition to his involvement with sports-enhancing drugs, Uranus and Neptune and golden mean midpoint structures appear to be inclined to activities that give a more subtle sense of exhilaration. Activities like bicycling and skiing are attractive as one gets energized and entranced by the activity. There are changes in brain chemistry from this exercise. So here's a website address, for example, on changes in brain chemistry that happen through those kinds of exercise. So all that exhilaration, the oxygen, the changes in the brain chemistry get one into an elevated sort of state of mind, which is what these patterns are seeking, is some kind of way outside the normal way of seeing things. And here's his chart and the midpoint structures in it. And here's this lady, Julie Erickson, who's able to see spirits of recently deceased people, highly sensitive and intuitive, also very competent computer science teacher, project manager, very successful in life. Money comes easily to her, very lucky. And she also has these things, Neptune at Saturn, Uranus, 2-minute orb. So you get a highly sensitized person, is all it means. The person's highly sensitized and can live in this highly sensitive world, and they will seek out things that enhance that feeling. And sometimes it's rather subtle, like the aerobic kind of exercise that keeps you in a more elevated state of mind and sensitivity. And Monica Bellucci, we will discuss her in the next video, because in her case, it's not as simple and straightforward as she is a drug user or a murderer or a psychic. None of those is true, but we'll see how this operates in her life, and we'll devote an entire video into describing that. So I'll show this in the next video, these intricate patterns. And what you want to keep in mind here is that these patterns don't always manifest in blatant, concrete ways. Murderers, drug addicts, psychics. What they're really showing is a capacity, like the Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, for high sensitivity. And that high sensitivity can come out in different ways. And we'll see how it works in the life of Monica Bellucci. So she does have an unusually inspired view of the world. I'll go into this in the next video. I'm already at 43 minutes. And we'll pick up with this on the next video. Okay, my friends. So bottom line is these golden mean midpoint structures are showing up very clearly in the natal charts and also by transit. And we're entering a whole new world of astrological information that has not been used before. So thank you very much for listening, my friends. If you like this, I appreciate if you subscribe or you like the videos. And also in this video, we're using the Sirius software, which is from Cosmic Patterns Software. And this is the website for Cosmic Patterns Software, is www.astrosoftware.com. Thank you very much for listening, my friends. God bless. Namaste.